So a lot of you have been asking me to do this for quite a while, and it's the top 20 horror movies of all time, my personal favourites. This is in no way a universal list on what I think is the definitive, best horror movies that have ever been made, because that's a completely different list, but it's more of the ones that I personally felt, some personal attachment to. I thought they were personally the best movies and the ones that I got the most enjoyment from watching throughout the years. So basically a top 10 list was a bit too hard, so I came up with a top 20 list, because there are a lot of horror movies that I do actually quite like and feel deserve a lot of praise. There's quite a lot of generic ones in here, but I'd say there's more obscure ones towards the top 5. So let's start off with the number 20, and that is The Shining. Obviously, Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, based on the Stephen King novel. Stephen King isn't really a huge fan of this, but in my opinion, this is just such an iconic horror movie, and in my opinion, probably one of the most definitive horror movies ever made. There's a lot of standout moments in this, and just overall the theme of some family man turning into a deranged killer in the middle of nowhere, completely snowed in, trying to attack his wife and kid, is probably one of the most scariest things on a personal level that anyone can ever encounter. It's the horror of the human mind, and that's personally why I think this film did so well, and with the success of the novel and everything like that. But I couldn't really not include that one, but that is one that's been talked about, I'm sure, many times before. Number 19, Dario Argento's Suspiria. Not my favourite Dario Argento film by any means, but probably one of the most recognised Dario Argento movies of all time, about this young girl who attends this dance school in Italy, and the owners or the founders of the dance school turn out to be witches, and it's just such a well-filmed, well-shot movie. I'm sure many people already know about this, but the colour tones in this movie are just partly what make this film so iconic. Probably the most, like The Shining, which was probably the most definitive movie in the West, this is probably the most definitive movie in, Italian horror. So just a really great movie. Number 18 is George C. Scott in The Changeling, and this movie is probably one of the most creepiest movies I've ever seen in terms of the supernatural and ghosts and stuff like that. They tried to do this again years later by, but just failed completely. Every single movie after this, in my opinion, just isn't as effective as this. If you want a really definitive and genuinely creepy ghost story, I think this is from 1980. This is just, in my opinion, the best one to go with. There is a lot of moments where you just hear nothing, and then all of a sudden you'll get, a noise which will just freak you out. Well, not really freak you out, but catch you off guard, I guess. And in my opinion, one of the best ghost stories that's ever been adapted to film. Number 17 is Amsterdam, and this is a incredibly fun horror movie set in, of course, Amsterdam. And the main reason I love this movie is not really because of any of the horror aspects, but because of the killer himself is a deep sea diver, that in a deep sea diver outfit. And in my opinion, that is just such a cool aspect. And there is an incredible chase sequence in this, which of course falls into action more than horror. But if you haven't checked this out, I would definitely recommend this one. Definitely pleasantly surprised me when I watched this, and in my opinion, just one of the more fun horror movies that's out there. And it's also directed by Dick Maas, so what's not to love there? Number 15, I think, or 16, I think, Just Before Dawn. One of the creepiest, you know, atmospheric slasher movies set in the woods. This one is by far, you know, one of the greatest movies set in that kind of environment, in my opinion. And the director also directed Squirm, which, you know, I wasn't really that much of a fan of. But this movie, you know, you've got two fat psychopathic brothers in the middle of nowhere, and there's just a lot of great suspenseful scenes in this movie. Mainly, you know, the scenes where the people are getting stalked on their own through the woods is genuinely some of the more creepiest aspects of this, but definitely want to check it out. Number 15 is, I'm sure everyone is familiar with this one, From Dusk Till Dawn. They did a TV series in this one, but it just wasn't really as effective, even though I still enjoyed it. Haven't checked out any of the sequels here, but this is by far one of the greatest sort of vampire movies. And you know, this one combines action with horror really well. Quentin Tarantino, of course, acts, and I think he directed some of the scenes in this as well. But great Robert Rodriguez movie about these two guys that end up kidnapping this family in order to take them to this weird sort of bar, and you know, everyone in there turns out to be vampires, and the first half of the movie turns out to be a sort of crime drama, and the second half more of a horror, not so much gore fest, but you know, there is that kind of element there, and it does have an amazing sexy scene with Salma Hayek in there as well, which that alone is definitely worth watching for. Number 14, my personal favourite giallo movie of all time, Blood and Black Lace with Mario Bava. If you haven't seen this one, definitely want to check out. Again, really creepy, atmospheric movie about this model agency and this killer that stalks all of the models. And he's just a really iconic killer in this. He's wearing, you know, the black fedora hat, the white mask, and it's kind of like a morph suit mask with a large trench coat. And yeah, definitely one of the creepiest slasher movies, and I would say one of the more atmospheric slasher movies that there is. A lot of these movies are based on atmosphere, because that's personally what I think defines the horror genre more than, you know, blood and gore and everything like that. But yeah, Blood and Black Lace, definitely one to check out. Number 13, I believe, is Day of the Dead. My personal favourite George A. Romero movie, and personal favourite of the Dead trilogy. Obviously everyone knows about this one, about everybody surviving underground bunker while there's a zombie apocalypse, you know, breaking out. Features one of the more iconic zombies in movie history. But yeah, Captain Rhodes, one of the more iconic characters in the horror genre, and yeah, it's got one of the greatest death scenes ever seen in any horror film, where a guy literally gets dismembered by a bunch of zombies. But yeah, definitely a great movie. Number 12, Cannibal Holocaust. For a while this one was one of my favourite horror movies of all time. But obviously this one is not really much to it, it's more of the soundtrack and the overall you know, feel this movie has. And there is a lot of controversy surrounding the animal deaths in this, which obviously I don't approve of, but you know, it is something that makes this film as controversial as it is, and you know, that's one of the reasons why it's so horrific and disturbing. And yeah, just Shameless did a great job releasing this one. But yeah, I think it's just quite a scary aspect, being stuck, you know, in a jungle with a bunch of cannibals. But yeah, if you haven't checked out the soundtrack to this one, the soundtrack alone is worth watching the movie for. And number 11 is The Burning. I do prefer The Burning to Friday the 13th or any of its sequels. I just personally feel like this one, I don't know, I just prefer the story. I think it's more creative on what they did with the killer and, you know, all of the death scenes. It is, again, a camp slasher movie, meaning it's set in a camp, not that it's got any kind of feminine qualities. But yeah, I just really enjoyed the characters more in this than any of the Friday the 13th series. You know, the camp counsellors and such are just less annoying, and the killer actually has an interesting backstory. The top 10. Number 10 is one you might not consider a horror movie as such. It's more of an exploitation with horror elements, but it's Island of Death. And probably one of the most, you know, interesting, funny, fucked up movies you're ever going to see. You know, a great soundtrack, Desperation Understanding, or Destination Understanding, I think it's called. It just, I don't know, weirdly, it does have a weird feel to this, but it's also sort of like, feels like a deranged, feel-good kind of movie. As a farting farmer that farts on these tourists' heads, or this tourist's head. And yeah, it's just one that caught me off guard, and definitely one that, you know, unexpectedly caught my attention. The next one is the original The Grudge, and this one is the original 1998 movie, although the director did direct the remake and the sequel to the remake, and, you know, the sequel to the original, and, you know, it's just known for quite a lot of the Grudge movies, or the Ju-on movies as they're originally called, but he directed all of them, and this one is probably one of the more iconic, creepier Japanese movies out there, with the girl coming down the stairs. I think it was just done way better in the original than the remake. And yeah, it's just such a creepy, I think it's like an animation where the girl comes down the stairs. It's kind of looks like it's done in stop motion animation just by the way she's moving. But just so many creepy moments in the original Grudge, and I just can't recommend the original and the sequel to the original enough, although the remake is by far one of the better horror remakes, you know, Americanized remakes of Japanese horror movies. Number 8, we have Magic, and this is my personal favourite Anthony Hopkins performance, and also probably my favourite Anthony Hopkins movie, and just such a great movie. It's got Burgess Meredith in this as well, who plays the agent to Anthony Hopkins, who plays like a ventriloquist, failed magician, who has a creepy dummy called Fats, who you can see on the front cover here. But yeah, just the bond between Fats and Corky in this, which is Anthony Hopkins' character, is by far one of the creepiest moments throughout the film, as you don't know whether it's all in Anthony Hopkins' head or whether, you know, Fats is really a talking dummy, but obviously to the more rational viewer it would be that obviously Corky has a mental illness, and it's just a great movie that's left to the interpretation of the viewer, and honestly I can't recommend this one enough. By far my favourite Anthony Hopkins performance, and one of the more creepier killer dummy movies out there. Number 7 is The Church. You know, this director has directed so many other good horror movies, but in my opinion this one is my personal favourite. The characters in this are absolutely spectacular, they're not annoying at all, and just overall the theme of this, you know, demonic presence inside this church is just, you know, absolutely fantastic. But this old church was based on this old sort of burial ground, and you know, there's powers that are inherited within. But yeah, everything about this movie just absolutely fantastic. One of my all-time favourite Italian horror movies, and personally, you know, I just love the setting with the church, the old creepy church, cathedral, or whatever it is. I just really did it for me. Number 6, I believe, is The Invisible Man. The sequels to this are pretty much trash, but you know, the original Invisible Man from 1933, based on the H.G. Wells novel, which is also incredible, is just one of the most iconic movies of all time. I love, you know, the presence of the Invisible Man, how he looks in the movie all bandaged up. Lots of great scenes from this, including the special effects, which, you know, were used to make the Invisible Man seem invisible. Yeah, I just always enjoyed the story, and I just find it one of the more entertaining horror movies from the early golden age of cinema, and it's just one I would definitely recommend. Number 5 is Halloween 2. Yes, Halloween 2, not the original, even though I do like the original. Every Halloween I watch Halloween and Halloween 2, and in my opinion Halloween 2 is just more entertaining. It's more fast-paced than the original, and I love the hospital setting as well in this one. Donald Pleasence obviously returns to the role of Dr. Loomis, and Jamie Lee Curtis to the role of Laurie. And yeah, I just really can't praise this movie enough. I love the hospital setting. Michael Myers is just way more brutal in this one, and personally I just think that this is the best Halloween movie of the franchise. Number 4 is the original Dark Water, not the one with Jennifer Connelly, even though that was a decent attempt at a remake. The original Dark Water, in my opinion, is just one of the most unnerving movies about, you know, the paranormal, and in my opinion it's just creepy because the main character has this young daughter who runs wild in this sort of creepy apartment building, and you know that there's a presence in the apartment building. It's a very dark movie, and it's really those isolated shots with the daughter that's the most unsettling, because you know this place has something more to it than meets the eye, and for a young girl to be on her own, sort of isolated with these demonic spirits, and you know, something that isn't quite right in the environment, it's just something that's always quite shocked me when watching it. But yeah, it is from the director of the original Ringu movie, which I thought was okay. It wasn't quite as good as this, and if you're going to check out Dark Water though, definitely the original is the one to go for, rather than the remake. Number 3 is my personal favourite slasher movie of all time, and that is Rosemary's Killer, aka The Prowler. This one is by far my favourite. I've reviewed this on my channel. I've also done a tribute video to this, so check those out. And yeah, this is just, personally in my opinion, one of my favourite, or one of the better done slasher movies of the 80s. Features a killer that's dressed as a, you know, World War II soldier. He also has a gas mask, I believe, carries a pitchfork. Just personally a really great look to a slasher villain, and also the story in this one, the backstory is just so interesting of this killer who has returned from war, or he returned from war all those years ago, and now he's seeking his lover out, but on the way he's just killing everybody in sight. And you know, I just think the backstory to this is way more creative than your average slasher movie. It's also directed by Joseph Zito, which obviously is known for many other movies, including some canon movies with Chuck Norris. But yeah, just in terms of suspense, atmosphere and everything like that, and more importantly the look of the killer, Rosemary's Killer is probably the best slasher movie out there, in my opinion. So number 2 and number 1. Number 2 is Martin. Great horror movie about a young adult who is convinced he is a vampire, or at least that is left to the audience's interpretation. You know, I think that's one of the most fun parts of this movie, is it leaves you guessing if he is a vampire or not, and you can kind of interpret or take away from the movie as you will. But this is just personally one of the greatest horror movies in my opinion. And I think I said earlier that Day of the Dead was my favourite George A. Romero movie. This is directed by George A. Romero, and this is by far my favourite George A. Romero movie. You know, the actor who plays Martin, John Russo, I think he's called. I think he is called John Russo. But he does a great job playing Martin. Such an iconic look to Martin with the long hair and everything. But you know, he carries a razor blade and, you know, cuts the wrists of victims, and it's mainly, the only way I can describe this is it's kind of like a depressing coming of age movie about a boy who thinks he's a vampire. And in my opinion, I don't know, this film has always stuck with me. One of George A. Romero's most underappreciated movies of all time, in my opinion, but just one of the greatest, in my opinion. And finally, time for my number one horror movie of all time. It is Phenomena. It is a close shave between the last five, and I think they're all equally as good as each other. So at any given time, these could change. But Phenomena with Jennifer Connelly, always loved Jennifer Connelly as an actress, and I think she does an amazing job in this movie, considering her age as well. I think she was around 17 in this. But this movie just has everything. It has Donald Pleasance, a killer sort of like crazy chimp. You know, Jennifer Connelly has these telekinetic powers where she can connect with insects. The theme of it being in a sort of girls' school and this killer going around killing people. This movie just has everything, and in my opinion, it is the best of Dario Argento's work, even though Suspiria and Tenebrae are also on the same level. I just personally prefer this one and find this one to be a much more entertaining watch. So yeah, that was my top 20 horror movies of all time. Hope you've enjoyed this list, and please stay tuned for more content. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.